They thought I was just a sentimental old man who didn't know what day it was anymore. Maybe that's why they got so sloppy. Before I tell you what I found in that storage unit and what I did with it, I need you to understand something. I was not the kind of man who fought back 68 years on this earth, and I had never once raised my voice at my own children. My wife used to say that was my greatest strength. Turns out, she also knew it was my greatest vulnerability. So she did something about it. For 31 years, without saying a word to me, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. My wife Irene and I met at a church potluck in Savannah, Georgia in 1987. She brought a sweet potato casserole that was so good I went back for thirds, and she laughed at me for it. That laugh, I fell in love with that laugh before I even knew her last name. We were married 11 months later in the same church, in a ceremony so small that my mother complained about it for the next 20 years. We had 2 children. Our son, I'll call him my older one, was born in 1990. Our daughter came 3 years after that. We raised them in a 4-bedroom colonial in Macon, Georgia, bought it for $94,000 in 1993, paid it off by 2011. Irene was an elementary school librarian. I worked logistics management for a regional trucking company until I retired at 64. We were not wealthy people. We were careful people. That distinction matters more than I can tell you. Irene got her diagnosis in the spring of 2021. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The doctor sat across from us in a small room with a box of tissues on the table, and I remember thinking, who put those tissues there? Did they put them there every morning? Is that someone's job? I was not processing things correctly. Irene reached over and took my hand and squeezed it twice, which was her way of saying, I'm here, it's okay. She was the one who'd just been told she was dying and she was comforting me. That was Irene. She passed 14 months later, in July of 2022, hospice at home, in our bedroom, with the ceiling fan turning slowly and the windows open because she always said she wanted to hear the birds when she went. I held her hand the whole last night. In the morning she was gone, and the birds were still singing, and I sat there for I don't know how long before I called anyone. The funeral was on a Thursday. My older one flew in from Charlotte with his wife. I'll call her my daughter-in-law, and I want you to hold on to that name because she becomes important. And my daughter drove up from Jacksonville. I was grateful to have them there. I was hollowed out in a way I'd never experienced, and their presence helped. Or so I thought. By Saturday, something had shifted. My daughter-in-law was the first one I noticed. She started moving through the house differently. Not grieving differently. More like assessing. She'd stand in a doorway and look at a room the way you look at a room when you're thinking about paint colors. She asked me twice on Saturday where Irene kept her jewelry. I told her it was personal, and I'd go through it in my own time. She smiled and said of course, and then asked my older one the same question when she thought I was in the other room. On Sunday morning I came downstairs and found her photographing the living room furniture with her phone. I said, "What are you doing?" She said she was just capturing memories. I didn't say anything. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a coffee and stood at the window and thought about the fact that my wife had been dead for 6 days. That afternoon, my older one sat me down at the kitchen table. He had a yellow legal pad. I don't know why the legal pad sticks in my memory, but it does. It was the kind of detail that felt planned, like he'd thought about how this conversation should look. He said he and his wife had been talking, and they were worried about me living alone in this big house, and they thought it might be time to think about my options. I said, "My options?" He said there was a very nice continuing care community outside of Charlotte. Close to them, I could sell the house, use the proceeds to cover the entrance fee, and have everything I needed. He slid a brochure across the table. It had a photograph of elderly people doing water aerobics on the cover. I was 66 years old, I had my driver's license, my faculties, and a cardiologist who told me 6 months prior that my heart was in better shape than most men 15 years younger. I looked at that water aerobics brochure, and I looked at my son's face, and I understood something I hadn't fully understood before. He didn't ask if I wanted to leave my home. He assumed I would. My daughter was in the room, but she didn't say anything to contradict him. She looked at the table. I said I appreciated their concern, and I needed some time. They stayed through Monday, and when they left I stood in the driveway and watched their cars go, and I felt more alone than I had at any point during the funeral. Which was saying something. The weeks after that were quiet in the way that grief is quiet. I moved through the house. I ate cereal for dinner more nights than I'd like to admit. I watched baseball. I talked to Irene's photograph on the mantel, which I know sounds like something a person says when they're not doing well, but I want to tell you it actually helped. She had that kind of presence. In September, 2 months after she passed, I started going through her things. I wasn't ready, but I knew I'd never be ready, so I started anyway. Her closet, her nightstand, the drawer in the bathroom where she kept her lotions and her reading glasses, and a small notebook with grocery lists going back years. It was in that nightstand drawer, underneath a cedar sachet and a collection of birthday cards I'd given her over the decades, that I found the envelope. It was a standard white business envelope, sealed, with my name written on the front in Irene's handwriting. Just my name. No other words. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a single key on a plain metal ring and a folded note card. The note card said, Harmon Self-Storage, Unit 14, Route 7, Valdosta. The combination to the lockbox inside is your mother's birthday. I've been taking care of us. I love you. Irene Harmon Self-Storage. Valdosta was 3 hours south. I had no memory of us ever discussing a storage unit in Valdosta. I had no idea what any of this meant. I sat on the edge of that bed for a very long time. I drove down on a Tuesday in early October. The facility was exactly where the address said it would be, off Route 7. A plain metal building with an American flag out front and a woman at the front desk named Patty, who looked up Unit 14 in about 4 seconds and confirmed that yes, the account was paid through the end of the following year, and yes, my name was listed as a secondary account holder. Irene had added me 8 years ago. 8 years. She had rented this unit for at least 8 years, possibly longer, and I had not known. The unit was a 10 by 10 climate-controlled. I unlocked it and pulled up the rolling door and stood there in the fluorescent light of the corridor and stared. There were stacked plastic bins along the left wall, 6 of them, labeled in Irene's careful handwriting. There was a metal lockbox on a folding table in the center, the kind you bolt down for security, the kind banks use. And there were filing boxes, 4 of them, arranged on a metal shelving unit against the back wall. I stood there for probably 5 full minutes before I moved. The combination to the lockbox was my mother's birthday, month, day, year, 6 digits. It opened on the first try. Inside was a savings passbook from First Community Bank of South Georgia and a folder of account statements. I sat down on the concrete floor. There was nowhere to sit, and I needed to sit. And I opened the folder. Irene had been depositing money into a savings account in both our names since 1993. The year we bought the house. The year our daughter was born. Not large amounts. $30 here, $60 there, sometimes $100 on the months when she'd done some private tutoring on the side, which I had known about, but we'd always just folded that money into the household. Except, apparently she hadn't. Not all of it. 30 years of small deposits. The current balance in that account was $214,000. I had to read the number 3 times. I put the folder down on my knee, and I looked up at the fluorescent light, and I thought about 30 years of $30 deposits. I thought about every school librarian's salary she'd ever brought home, and every tutoring session, and every birthday check from her mother that she'd said she was putting into savings, and now I understood what savings meant to Irene. Specifically, in a way I hadn't before, she had been building a fortress. Quietly, methodically, for 30 years. And she had put both our names on it so that when something happened, and she always knew something would happen. She was a planner, Irene. She was always 10 steps ahead. I would have somewhere to stand. The filing boxes were equally thorough. Insurance policies I hadn't known existed. The deed to the house with a note clipped to it explaining that she had added a transfer on death designation to the deed in 2018, which meant the property would pass directly to me outside of probate and that neither of our children had any legal claim to it without my consent. There was a letter from an estate attorney in Valdosta, a woman named Ms. Beaumont, explaining the structure of everything, and a note from Irene saying that Ms. Beaumont knew about the unit and could be contacted. There was also a sealed envelope with my older one's name on it, and one with my daughter's name, and a third one with my daughter-in-law's name. I did not open those. And there was a letter for me. I read it sitting on the floor of that storage unit for the better part of an hour. She wrote about the early years, when we were young and money was tight, and she'd gotten into the habit of setting aside small amounts because it made her feel less afraid. She wrote about watching her own mother be left with nothing after her father died, and how that fear had lived in her bones ever since. She wrote about watching the way our daughter-in-law looked at things, at our house, at our furniture, at her jewelry, during holiday visits over the years, and how it had confirmed a worry she'd carried since our son first brought that woman home. I don't want to make you feel like I was hiding things from you, she wrote. I was hiding things for you. There's a difference. You are the most trusting man I have ever known, and I have loved that about you every single day. But trust requires that the other person deserves it, and not everyone does. I needed you to have options. Whatever they tell you after I'm gone, remember that the house is yours. The account is ours. And Miss Beaumont will handle the rest if you need her to. I folded that letter very carefully and put it back in its envelope. Then I took out my phone and called Miss Beaumont. She was exactly the kind of attorney you want in a situation like that. Methodical, unhurried, completely without drama. We met in her office the following week. She went through everything with me. The transfer on death deed, the savings account, the life insurance policy Irene had taken out in 2015, which I had known about but whose beneficiary I had not looked at closely. It was me, entirely me, with no secondary beneficiaries. I asked her what I should do about my older one and his wife. She set down her pen and looked at me and said, "Nothing yet. Let them make the next move." They made it 3 weeks later. My older one called and said he wanted to revisit the conversation about the house. His wife had found a continuing care community in Macon, actually, which would be even more convenient. He said the market was good right now, and they'd had a real estate agent, already take a look at comparables in my neighborhood, and the house could probably sell for around $340,000. And after the entrance fee at the facility, there'd be a comfortable amount left over for my care needs. I let him finish. Then I said, "The house is not for sale." He said he understood this was hard to hear, but he was just trying to be practical. I said I appreciated that. I also said that I'd recently become aware that the property deed included a transfer on death designation that predated any of these conversations, and that I'd been in contact with an estate attorney who had helped me understand my position clearly. I said that if he wanted to continue this conversation, he was welcome to have his own attorney call Ms. Beaumont. There was a long silence. He said, "What attorney? What are you talking about?" I said, "Your mother's attorney. She set everything up a long time ago. She just didn't need me to know about it until now." Another silence. Then he said, quietly, "This isn't what we intended." I said I hoped that was true, But I also said that photographing the living room furniture 4 days after your mother's funeral is a particular kind of intention, and I'd had some time to sit with that. He didn't say anything. I said I loved him. I said I loved him. I said that when he was ready to come visit his father as his father, not as a piece of property to be managed, the door was open. But the house was mine, the account was mine, and I would be staying right where I was. I hung up. I sat in the kitchen for a while after that. The ceiling fan was going. The windows were open. I could hear birds outside, the same way I'd heard them the morning Irene died. I want to tell you the part that still gets me, when I think about it at night. I went back through our bank statements from 1993 onward. I found the months she'd made deposits. I could tell because there'd be a small withdrawal from our joint checking, usually on Friday, usually $30 or $60 listed as a transfer. I'd never thought anything of it. She managed the household accounts. I trusted her completely. 311 separate deposits over 30 years. The smallest was $12. The largest was $400. That was the year she sold some furniture after her mother passed and kept the money separately without telling me. I remembered that sale. I thought the money had gone to a car repair. 311 times she had quietly, deliberately, without any fanfare or explanation, set something aside for the two of us. I'm a grown man. I've buried my parents. I've had a knee replaced. I've laid off people during bad quarters and lost sleep over it. I don't cry easily. But I'll tell you honestly that when I added up those deposits and understood what they represented, 31 years of her thinking about my future, 31 years of her being afraid and doing something about the fear so I wouldn't have to. I put my head down on the kitchen table and I cried for a good long while. She couldn't protect me from losing her, but she could protect me from losing everything else. And she did. My daughter-in-law never called. My daughter called in December. She said she was sorry. She said she'd known the conversation about the house wasn't right, and she should have said something at the time. I told her I appreciated her saying so, and I meant it. We talked for almost an hour. It wasn't easy, but it was real, and real is what I needed. My older one took longer. He called in February. He didn't apologize exactly, but he asked if he could come visit, and I said yes. He came down in March, and we sat on the back porch and drank sweet tea, and talked about baseball, and didn't talk about the house at all. It was a start. I go to see Ms. Beaumont every 6 months now. I had my own will updated. I got my own estate documents in order, and I learned more about property law in the state of Georgia in 1 year than I ever expected to know. Irene would have found that hilarious. She always said I was the kind of man who had to be shown something before I believe it was real. She was right. The storage unit is empty now. I closed out the account in February and consolidated everything with a financial advisor here in Macon. A man named Bill, who came recommended by Miss Beaumont and who spent an entire first meeting just listening, which I appreciated. The $214,000 is invested conservatively, generating income. I'm fine. More than fine. I still live in the house on the same street where we raised our children. The magnolia in the front yard is blooming right now as I'm writing this. Irene planted that magnolia in 1997 because she said a house needed something in the yard that would outlast everyone who lived there. She was right about that too. I think about the 31 years of small deposits. I think about the woman who went through her days teaching children, making dinner, sitting beside me on the same porch, carrying a quiet, steady fear and transforming it, deposit by deposit, into something solid. She never asked me to thank her. She never told me what she was doing. She just did it, because she loved me, and because she was smarter than I gave her credit for, and because she understood that love without planning is just a feeling. But love with planning is a foundation. She built me a foundation. I'm still standing on it, If you're watching this and you have someone in your life who manages things quietly, who makes small decisions you don't always notice, pay attention. Say thank you. Ask questions while you still can. I wish I'd asked more questions. And if you don't have that person, if you're the one doing the planning alone, let me just tell you, it matters more than you know. It carries further than you think. Long after you're gone, someone is going to sit on a concrete floor in a storage unit with a folder on their knee and understand for the first time what you did. That's everything. That's the whole story. If it meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've had something like this happen in your own family, good or bad, I'd like to hear about it in the comments. Because what I've learned through all of this is that I'm not the only one, and neither are you. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in this story. Not just the events, but the mechanics underneath them. Why things turned out the way they did. My older one and his wife didn't show up at that kitchen table with that yellow legal pad because they were evil people. They showed up because they had spent years watching me be passive, watching me defer, watching me let Irene handle everything quietly without question. And they concluded, reasonably from where they stood, that I would keep doing that. They read the room, they just didn't know what was in the room. That's the first thing I've sat with. What we allow, over a long period of time, teaches people what to expect from us. I had been so comfortable letting Irene be the strong one, that I'd stopped being visible as someone with any strength of my own. That's not a character flaw, exactly. But it's a gap, and gaps get filled by whoever is standing nearby with their own agenda. Irene understood this. She understood it decades before I did, which is why she spent 31 years quietly closing that gap on my behalf. She wasn't angry about it. She didn't lecture me. She just did what needed doing in the way she always did. Steadily, without drama, with a patience I don't think I could replicate if I tried. What I keep returning to is the word she used in her letter. She said she was hiding things for me, not from me. I've turned that sentence over in my mind more times than I can count. The difference between those two prepositions is the whole moral weight of the story. Deception in the service of someone else's protection is not the same thing as deception in the service of your own gain. One corrodes trust. The other builds a floor under the person you love so they don't fall through when everything else gives way. My daughter-in-law was hiding things from people. Irene was hiding things for someone. The contrast between those two women, what each of them chose to do with their intelligence and their planning, is something I think about more than I probably should. Irene had every quality my daughter-in-law had. She was smart, she was strategic, she was detail-oriented, she knew how systems worked. She just pointed all of it in a different direction, toward building something instead of taking something, toward patience instead of pressure, the discipline that takes, the quiet, unrecognized discipline of 31 years of small deposits without any acknowledgement, without anyone ever saying good job, without even the person you're protecting knowing what you're doing. That is a kind of strength I had underestimated entirely. I think that's what I want to leave people with. Not a lesson exactly, more of an observation. The people who last, the people who build things that hold, they're usually not the loudest ones in the room. They're the ones doing something small and consistent when nobody's watching. That yellow legal pad my son brought to the kitchen table looked like power. But the filing boxes in that storage unit in Valdosta were the actual power. The difference is that one of them took 31 years to build. I'm 68 years old, and I'm still standing in the house we bought in 1993 because a woman with a librarian's salary and a quiet kind of courage decided 31 years ago that I was worth protecting. I hope somebody out there is doing the same for you, and I hope you're paying enough attention to notice.